Lisa, how are
Good
you?
morning. Good morning. What a pleasure to be together from different
I
cities.
know, finally. And you know what? What's amazing, Lisa? I know that this is your last year at the School of Nations.
It's been
And
wonderful.
I know, and I can't help but to think back to when I first met you. And I think it was like 12 years ago. You and I, if I'm correct, Lisa, we're the first female heads of schools here in Brazil. I think you were first, maybe.
Well, there had been some before, but they didn't make it for long. I,
That is correct. That is correct because there was a prior head of school here that was female. But you're right.
Mhm.
Not not many lasted as long as we have, right? So it's really awesome to connect with you, Lisa, and to be working on a book together to share our stories for new and upcoming and aspiring heads of schools. And so I just kind of want to, before I jump right into the questions, I would like you to please introduce yourself and share with us a little bit about your background and your experience at School of Nations.
Well, there's a lot of background because I'm not a spring chicken. But let's say that I've had a lot of experience living internationally because, very early on, I moved to Colombia and raised my children there, and then gradually got into the field of education there as an ESL teacher, and later in a school called Colegio Panamericano as a teacher, as preschool and elementary principal, and eventually even as a director there because people get to know you and trust your work. And so I had most of my 21 years in Colombia raising my children, and I was completely bilingual. My children, actually, their first language isn't English, it is Spanish. So they're completely immersed in the Colombian culture, but that served them well in their careers. So they're living in the US, but all the skills they learned of cross-cultural communication have served them well. So it's been a wonderful career, wonderful experience. Then 2 years in Guatemala, and now 18 years here. So most of my life has been out of the US. I think what I could least speak to is our educational situations in the US, practically.
And if we were to just like dive right into the book, I really appreciate how your chapter addresses equity and cultural responsiveness. And right now, more than ever, in international organizations throughout the world, they're addressing DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and J for justice. And I really appreciate how you tackle equity through, this perspective lens of learning, friendship, and transformation in an international school context. And from reading your chapter, it really does reflect all of your expertise and years in leadership in an international school. There was a big background noise, so I'm going to start all over.
No, that was the airplane. So no, that's okay.
Okay,
Can
so
people, yeah, okay.
Sure, I'm going to start over with that question. Let me see what
You're in airport, so we have to be a little careful. It's
yeah, it's okay.
I was actually here to not be disturbed because otherwise people are knocking on my door at school.
Okay, I'm going to start over with
there's no escaping distraction here in Brazil.
No, it happens. Lisa, I really appreciate how your chapter addresses equity and cultural responsiveness. And right now, more than ever, in a lot of the international organizations around the world, they are addressing diversity, equity, and inclusion, as well as justice. We know this as DEIJ. And I really appreciate how you tackle equity within an international school context, and how you do so through the lens of learning, friendship, and transformation. excuse me. And it really reflects your years of experience in international school leadership, and of course, your very rich experience and the authentic programs that you have implemented at your school. So my question to you is, thinking back to when you were, as you say, a spring chicken or an aspiring brand new head of school, what are some key points from your particular chapter that you wish you had known prior to starting?
Okay, well, I think that even working in international education, one of the first things I notice is that schooling and education have really been going through a revolution, but not so much we see in the classroom. We still see a lot of desks, and sometimes we see the teacher in the front of the room and those kind of things. But there's been a wonderful evolution and revolution taking place in which we know because of advances in science and neuroscience and biology, and more we get like scans of the brain, how the brain-based learning. And so we realize more and more what's inside of a child. So I want to say my evolution even begins from before coming abroad. And I remember, growing up, you could still be put in a corner. You could still have corporal punishment. Still, the main way of learning was being silent in rows and taking time quizzes and tests all the time and memorization. And science was from a book. And if you didn't understand, it was only from a book. It was almost no hands-on then. And so a little bit of that was mirrored when I first started out in my international educational position. I remember one of the growing trends was, learning through all the senses, multiple intelligences. They called it learning styles, but it was actually just recognizing about how much we learn better through, using all our five senses and different facets of ourselves, not just having a teacher in the front of the classroom, the sage on the stage. But what I think I wish I'd known, and I used to say this to myself as time went along in my position as a director, that because I would start to see this more, that my greatest need in leadership was understanding really complex issues of special education, psychology, individual needs, because that, a person thriving in the regular classroom is thriving, and so they're not going to bring up issues. And so I realized how much it would have benefited me. I can't speak for other educators, but to really know how to advocate for all these different kinds of situations, children and their needs. And then in my own family life, this was a huge education because I ended up being a grandmother of a child who had autism. I was one of the first people to notice that when he heard sound, sometimes when she was, I don't always appreciate, but like, that he completely would go like this with sound, like literally, and then is in a city with good medical care, and we diagnosed. And then I started realizing some of the things that we take for granted, like we say something like, oh, pay attention or look at me. That can take years of therapy and training and practice, ABA therapy. It can take years of therapy to just sit right with occupational therapy. For him to have been now in equal conditions and thrive in a school, he's thriving. But and thank God in Boston, you could detect that early. So it started to really, now I'm completely very sensitized to the issue of how vastly different each child's needs can be and what we have to do to level the field, because equity is when you give all equal opportunities, but not all can afford the equal opportunity. So you have to level the playing field so they can enjoy the equal opportunity.
Yeah, and I really like how you really spell that out in your chapter, how to really distinguish the difference between equity and equality. When we look at international education, there was a really interesting point that you made in this book about how the international students in their context that in comparison to the whole world, they're really the minority. I really thought that was very profound how you said that. But my question to you is, what makes international education so unique, or or I guess if you could look at it through another lens, what do you think is a commonality in international schools?
Well, one of my privileges, because I had worked for my religion, I had worked in the countryside many years in Colombia, and I actually started my career in education through working in villages with families and children. And I'd always thought I just want to maybe do my whole life, like service in communities and things like that. And then after a while, you do need to make a living. And I thought, what better place to make my living though than through international education? Because the whole premise of international education, it has to be, you're not going to, even the wealthiest families, you're not going to invest in these school kinds of international schools unless you want to be preparing your child as a global or world citizen. So that premise in itself is beautiful, because right away it expands you that I'm not only for myself only and only my career. In some way, I'm recognizing, all our schools do this, some way I'm recognizing that I need to somehow contribute to the world or give back to the world or do something to make the world a better place. I think there's rarely a school that doesn't want to do something with those citizenship values and not only prepare their kids for colleges. And that's the part I love about our schools. And when I meet other international directors like yourself, I just identify so much. It's like meeting a family, and you just end up loving all these other schools and directors, and it's not competitive. You really feel like you're all in it together. And I know all of us are thinking beyond great academic education. I know we all are, all committed to it.
Right. And I know that you, having served so long as an international school leader, you probably have lots of words of wisdom and stories to share. And I'm sure that when you were writing this chapter, and knowing you personally, I know you've probably had lots of ideas and wanted to write about many different other interesting topics. But what is that other lesson that you wish you had the opportunity to write about or address, but you weren't able to do so just because we asked you to, focus on one? Is there another particular?
Well, there's two. One is about adversity and one is about social justice. So beginning with the one on social justice, I think all of our schools too, we have a good social conscience. I think we're all trying to be more awoken about the needs of individuals, about neurodiversity, about racial ethnic diversity, a lot of diversities to think about and comprehend. That's why it's a full field of education in and of itself. But one of the things schools talk a lot about is, can they give scholarships? How can they include more diversity in their community? And to be honest, sometimes you have to pull people out of neighborhoods where it's not always completely comfortable to go through the scholarship. If you can, it's good to have diversity that way. But one of the things we started thinking about, how do we impact the world that we care? And we're contributing some way, giving back to society, but not like the big wealthy school doing charitable work. So we didn't want to be in a role of paternalism or we know more, anything of this. So we created a project called U Nations, and U Nations comes from Una, Unite. And what we wanted it was to be a project of teachers to teachers, administrators to administrators. But what I love about it is you can go in and change a whole school system, and they can change you, because what you're doing is trading stories and friendships about your reality. It doesn't work in a formal, prescribed way. It's through conversations, coffees. At first it was with coffees and people going to each other's schools. Now it's more, and it's more through friendship and just conversation and consultations. And there's like what they would call an exchange, a troca, like there's exchange and sharing. And I found that our teachers in the school that participate in these projects of outreach, I can't explain, it brings them so much joy and fulfillment. And to the school that we help, for example, one of our main schools was in Manaus. It's in one of the poorest neighborhoods of the Manaus. And one time when they went there, a robbery occurred while they were there, and all kinds of adventures happened. But they're so close to the teachers and teacher close to them, and because of online and what we've learned with Zoom and online education and what we've shared with each other, we can still be in very close contact. And their school was able to stay open through the COVID crisis and use all like the tools that we were using. They were using the same tools. It was very exciting. But I think it's important at schools, if you can help a whole other system, that's sometimes more important than helping one or two individuals that are ethnically diverse. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I was reading about that and I was just highlighting, I think, every line that you wrote there. It's just so amazing. Yeah, the partnership that your school developed, right, with an NGO called Associação para Avanço da Cidadania do Campo. That sounds amazing.
Very good.
Amazing.
That was another one in the Amazon. And then the other part I wanted to share with you is about adversity. So when we went through COVID and we went through the crisis here in Brazil, and actually Brasilia was different than many other cities because they would open, close, open with hybrid, open, close. So we had to go through changes for political reasons. We didn't know why we would be opening and closing kind of thing. It didn't have anything to do with how bad the pandemic was. And so there's a lot of adversity. And, you know, one of the things that helped me, everything in your career helps you. One of the things that helped me the most was looking back to when I was a young director in Colombia. And we were living through the time of a kind of civil unrest, to not say civil war. And I remember times would come that like there'd even be like a helicopter overhead, and you'd be with radios if you couldn't get out in the street because they were torching buses and there were nails all over the gun, they were shooting. And so all the kinds of adversity I went through. And then one time I remember a father came into me as a new director and he said, here's a letter from an ultra-right group and here's a letter from an ultra-left group, and they're both bribing me and I'm broke. And can I leave my child in some months and not pay some months? And as soon as I get money, I'll pay you. And things like that. So learning how to deal with intense adversity actually for me was very formative, very formative. So when COVID came, for whatever reason, it reminded me of Colombia. It's like there's some kind of war going on. It's invisible now, but it was almost like the guerrilla war in Colombia. And I thought it actually helped me stay calm and focused, and I had learned a lot of lessons about adversity, and it wasn't so hard as I thought to lead through adversity.
I think that's what makes you an exceptional leader, Lisa.
Who knows? No.
You're so humble. You're saying no.
No.
Lisa, you know, this was just an amazing story you just shared, and it's an example of all the different crazy adventures that we face as international school leaders. And I know that in your lifetime, you have plenty of probably hair-raising and even life-threatening stories and experiences. But what is one particular story that, let's say, that you love to share at cocktail parties? You know, it's just a cool classic story that's in Lisa's box of stories, I guess.
So many. Well, I remember one time, but this isn't educational, but it certainly left a lot of power over me. You know, one of my many jobs, this is personal now, before I went into formal education, I sometimes tell this story. I was working with adoptions. I was working as a translator in Bucaramanga, Colombia, and hosting people in my home. And I remember one time I was hosting someone who was a military expert from Paris, and he was going to adopt a baby, and I would do the translating for them and all. And we're sitting out in my back patio, and I'm going, it's like near Christmas time, and I'm going, oh, listen to the fireworks. And he grabbed me and he ran me into the house, and he said, that's not fireworks, that's an AK, I don't know what machine gun, it's next door. And I'm like, oh, no. You know, you hear all these stories of violence in Colombia. No, don't you worry. They were having a shootout right across the wall from me, right across the wall in my house. Most unfortunately, they killed the gardener, but he was our friend actually. So we mourned for that for several years. But like, so that's a story I sometimes tell. So I was like, oh, listen to the nice firecrackers. Isn't Colombia fun? Because I guess. So another is, yeah, that's a story I sometimes tell at a party.
Wow.
Civil War stories, huh? So.
I think you've got a big book you've got to write.
You asked for what was the first thing that came to mind. There's so many. There are so many.
I am sure. I am very sure. And I think it's so weird. And I think this is kind of like one of the commonalities I find in a lot of our colleagues and friends from around the world, is that we kind of thrive in environments like this,
Yeah, don't we? It's weird, don't we?
Yeah, we really do.
Yeah, you almost have to be, and I just feel I'm so grateful, because I'll be retiring now. I'm so grateful. Even though it was exhausting, that I could be with the school through the COVID things, because I was thinking that I don't know how young or new directors did it. I do think it was daunting and exhausting, and in many ways overwhelming. But I'm very grateful I could be with the school, because I knew the school, I knew the players. And one of the things that we did was, we were practically, I used to have a bit, I could say, if I had an error as a director, I didn't spend enough time with parents, because I have a tendency to want to be with children, then teachers, have my hierarchy, and just not enjoy being with parents as much. So we had to learn to love being with parents, and sometimes we're almost daily in their living rooms, with them on Zoom, seeing their pets, getting to know them, and we got extremely close to parents. So one of the things I feel I hadn't really mastered in my repertoire was talking a lot with parents, and got to do that through COVID, because they're also scared. So we kept them online a lot. I don't know if you did that as well. But.
Yes. And this is what we reflect on constantly today, is just, COVID in many ways has been a leveraging, advantage point for us to be able to connect and make deeper connections with our families.
Yes. Yeah, that's been positive.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Lisa, I have a final question for you. And I know that you're very well traveled, have seen many different, cities. But if you were to ever go back to, one particular place, where's that one particular city that you dream of returning to one day, and why?
It might sound funny, but probably Colombia. Any city in Colombia, maybe Bucaramanga, maybe the coast. I had a relationship. I think the more you do, like you serve in a place, and you serve with different social realities, the more tied you come to places. I think that would be another advice I give to directors: really get involved if you can. I mean, with the culture, with the people beyond your school walls. And so I got deep into the culture of Colombia, and I fell in love with it. And I fell in love with rural Colombia. So I still have this tie to it. I always will. It's like a love.
Oh, that's beautiful. Lisa, thank you so much for spending, a few minutes of your very busy and hectic life that I know you've got going on there, as running a big international school in Brasilia. And I really appreciate you taking the time to share your story by writing this chapter, which I know will really help a lot of other aspiring school heads. And I think they just might find it entertaining too, to just read and learn more about what it's like to lead an international school. So I appreciate it, Lisa. Thank you.
And I just want to say a word of thank you to you all for opening this space and making this possible. It's just such an amazing idea. And maybe people don't know, but you're called Beautiful, Katerina the Beautiful, and you are beautiful inside and out. And you brought a lot of light to a lot of lives. I'm going to miss you a lot. Thank you.
But we're not saying goodbye, right? I know this is your last year.
Okay.
School of Nations. We'll keep in touch. I'm sure you're doing great in these consultancy work around the world. But right. Thanks again, Lisa. You take care.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks for watching and learning with us at SchoolRubric with educators from across the globe. For more access to articles, magazines, podcasts, live episodes, our international school directory, courses, and more, visit us at schoolrubric.org. Thank you.